Welcome to Dog People, a show about Ging Nang. All right, let's start over. Great start. Welcome to Dog People, a show about the Japanese punk bands Going Steady and Ging Nang Boyz. Going Steady was a late 90s, early 2000s punk band from Tokyo, Japan, who were at the forefront of the nation's seishun punk or youth punk scene. 3/4 of the band went on to play in Ging Nang Boyz, the unhinged, unfiltered successors to Going Steady's legacy. My name is Bob Vielma. I'm here with my co-hosts Mike Huguenot and Adam Passion. What's up, y'all?
Hey. This is the sound of my voice.
Yeah, what's up? We're former high school classmates and lifelong homies, and we're here to talk about these great bands from the perspective of superfans with a little bit of insider insight, hopefully. And in this first episode, I wanted to dive into the history of Japanese punk a little bit, just to set the stage and give a little context beyond the usual Ramones, Sex Pistols, Discord narrative we've all heard before. Arguably, the first Japanese punk band was called Friction. And Mike, you might be familiar with these guys. I heard a couple of the members were in Teenage Jesus and the Jerks and James Chance and the Contortions before they moved back to Japan and started Friction.
Interesting. So there was like a no wave kind of connection. Like they were both in the no wave, New York no wave scene.
Yeah, they were just some like weirdos who moved to New York briefly and then came back and started this band Friction. So their first album was released in 1980 and produced by Ryuichi Sakamoto, so they were kind of a big deal relatively for an early punk band in Japan. And another notable band that followed them up, you know, a big mile marker for Japanese punk, kind of in the mold of the Dead Kennedys or maybe the Misfits a little bit, was a band called the Stalin.
Yeah, I think I've seen the Stalin on like Killed by Death compilations.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I think they're for sure the type of band that like mega punk nerds who read Maximum Rock and Roll would be into. And they were featured in this movie called Burst City, which is like a dystopian punk musical that may have been a lot of people's first exposure to Japanese punk, just like a weird art house movie. But the most significant band in Japanese punk is easily the Blue Hearts. The Blue Hearts came on the scene in the mid-late 80s, and in my mind, they kind of fill the dual role of the Clash and the Ramones, kind of as like a beloved poppy sing-along punk band, but who also touched on topical political topics. They even had a song called Chernobyl that was banned for protesting against nuclear power. So like pretty legit punk shit. And the Blue Hearts toured the USA in 1990, but didn't quite make a mark out here, even though in Japan, they're easily the most beloved band in the Japanese punk canon. So if you jump forward about 5 years, the band that first really makes a mark in the West is High Standard. High Standard are the big band from the 90s Japanese punk explosion, and when I think of 90s punk out there, I start to see parallels between British bands like Leatherface and Snuff, or American bands like J Church and Operation Ivy, and then you compare them to the bands that were playing in Japan at the time like Sprocket Wheel and Lifeball and Fruity, and you can draw a clear comparison. This is what they're going for, you know? Or Japanese labels like Snuffy Smile and Less Than TV kind of parallel like Lookout Records or No Idea. And I see a lot of parallels from the underground days to the mainstream explosion days. And so when Green Day and The Offspring blow up in 94, High Standard's right behind them in 95. And not only do they blow up in Japan, but also they're the first band to really break out of the Japanese bubble. They tour the U.S. and Europe with NoFX. They support Rancid and Green Day on their Japanese tours. And, High Standard is hitting the Japanese charts by the time their second album, Angry Fist, comes out. And when High Standard breaks up in 2000, their final show was selling out a baseball stadium, 30,000 cap baseball stadium in Chiba. So, like, I think they're the Green Day of Japan. And just the same way that Green Day inspired a whole wave of bands after them. I really see High Standard in that light. And I got a High Standard shirt from you, Mike, so I know you heard them way back.
Yeah, I found out about them. I was thinking about this, and I'm pretty sure High Standard is probably the first Japanese band I ever consciously heard. Just trying to think of who else it would have been. I can't think of anyone before then. But basically, I got into punk music same time from Green Day and Offspring, basically. I think for basically everybody, most people are our age, kind of born in the mid to early 80s. That was kind of like our introduction to punk music. And from there, I like kind of got the bug and went with... just started looking at bands that those bands were thanking and lyric sheets and shirts of bands that they were wearing and just following those trails out. And when I was in early high school, that led to NoFX and Fat Records and everything, and found out about High Standard. I'm pretty sure through the Survival of the Fattest comp. I'm pretty sure it was either that one or Life in the Fat Lane, one of those two.
Do you remember what song was on it?
I think it was, now that I'm thinking about it, I think it was Life in the Fat Lane, and I think it was My Sweet Dog.
Classic.
I'm pretty sure that was it. I feel like that was the first song of theirs I ever heard, and really the first Japanese punk song I think I ever heard, if not the first like conscious Japanese rock song I ever heard even.
Yeah, I think a lot of, High Standard was on a comp back then. Like you said, Survival of the Fattest. So they were getting a little bit of love mixed in with all the other usual suspects that we would have heard of. And, there was bands like Kamuri, Husking Bee, Fruity. Garlic Boys was a weird one that I know me and Adam were into.
Yeah.
These bands all kind of had made inroads in the West with labels big and small releasing their stuff. But I feel like High Standard's the only one that really made their mark. And, other bands like Shonen Knife or The Boredoms kind of, we're kind of more for like the really hip crowd as opposed to us being like straight up nerds. Those bands kind of exist in a different world, and I don't think they really play a part in this narrative as much. High Standard's shadow loomed large over the Japanese punk scene in the mid-90s, and certainly did when Going Steady played their first show in 97. The band initially started as a three-piece with singer Mineta Kazunobu on guitar as well, bassist Abiko Shinya, and the drummer was Asai Takeo, who would later be their guitarist. And these guys had just barely moved to Tokyo from, at least Abiko and Mineta had just moved from Yamagata. Asai came from Aichi Prefecture. Shout out Aichi Prefecture, Adam.
He came from, like a stone's throw from where I live, because it was like Nishikasugai, which is, it's honestly, if I cross the river, I'm there. So yeah, he's from just down the street from me.
Tight. That's tight.
Yeah. And now I think he runs a fish shop or something, or anyway.
In town in Aichi?
No, I don't know where it is, but he has a blog that I was checking out to see what he was doing these days, and he made like a restaurant or something like that, and I had a picture of him holding a big fish. That's all I could tell. So
DVD of Big Fish?
Yeah, real big fish. He made a real big fish fan shop.
Cool.
So these guys, they started out as a three-piece. They made a demo tape in 1998, and that tape caught the attention of the record label TV Freak Records, as well as the band Young Punch. So Young Punch helps Going Steady get on a TV Freak compilation. And around this same time, it's when they got Murai Mamoru, their old high school classmate, to join on drums, and Asai switched to guitar. And so with the support they were getting from TV Freak, they got an opening slot on a few big TV Freak shows, and then they got a support slot on a 21-date nationwide tour with Young Punch. And this is kind of when they started to make a name for themselves in the Japanese scene. And by June of 99, that's when they released their first single, You and I, which apparently sold over 10,000 copies in its first month, which is kind of a big splash to
That's
make
incredible.
with your first single.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so at this time, they were kind of playing with these like goofy underground bands like Snail Ramp and the aforementioned Pot Shot and stuff like that. And they were kind of building momentum for the release of their first album later on in November of 99, Boys and Girls. So after Boys and Girls comes out, they do their first headlining tour starting in January of 2000, and they start selling out shows, making festival appearances, and they just kind of they quickly gain a lot of momentum. And Boys and Girls, when you listen to it, I think it's very influenced by the Blue Hearts. I think it's very influenced by the Buzzcocks, where they probably got their name from singles Going Steady. So it wasn't anything particularly mind-blowing, but there's a couple pretty good songs on it, a lot of energy. And, they follow up that record with a couple singles, Hoshi ni Negai wo and Tokyo Shonen. That leads up to the release of their second album in July 2001, Sakura no Uta. This album is a lot more polished. You can tell they've been listening to a lot of Weezer, and they're like, we're only going to write kick-ass pop songs now. But they don't lose the raw energy. And I think very notably, they stopped singing in English, which was kind of like the hallmark of Japanese punk at the time. I think every band was kind of doing their best high standard impression. And I kind of feel like Going Steady might have had a little vision, a little foresight to think, hey, if we want to write these kick-ass pop songs and get popular, we'll stop singing in English. Like, the Japanese people want to hear Japanese. I think that's what happened.
Yeah. I was listening earlier back to that Boys and Girls, and the thing that really strikes me, you kind of mentioned it, is that, like, it is a very pop punk and, like, a pop structured record. Like, the songs are very simple, mostly only entirely power chords. I think there's maybe a couple bar chords on the record. There's almost no any other chord form at all. It's pretty much just power chords in like vocal harmonies are a really big part. I think like just really like raw pop punk is kind of how it feels. It feels like a really unpolished compared especially to High Standard, who had like the Fat Wreck kind
classical
of
guitar.
Yeah, really crunchy, really big sounding and like sounds a lot of the time like kind of sampler replaced drums and Going Steady, that first record, though it's really clean compared to their other stuff. And what Ging Nang Boyz would go on to do, still sounds really like a live wire, and I think that's kind of the heart on that record that you start to see like really grow as they go on, but really like the beating heart of the Minna and Ging Nang Boyz Going Steady kind of sound that like total rawness is kind of already there as for how poppy those songs are.
I think there's also that first tape that you were talking about, that tape that they put out that got noticed. I was just listening to that, in preparation for this, and it sounds so different than. It almost sounds like those other really kind of wild, loose bands that were going on in that scene at the time, like like Fruity and Nuts and Milk and kind of stuff. It has like a really playful sound to it, and really experimental kind of weirdness to it. On the Boys and Girls album, I think it is at the end. The last song is the Going Steady, like self-titled song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was on their first tape. And that song in particular kind of stands out on that album because it's kind of weirder than the rest. It's kind of like, it's just almost like gibberish, him just blah, 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 and And I think that's what that first tape sounded like. And then you can see them kind of polish it up as they put out their first album and like their first few singles. And then they start to get, I don't know, like you said, more polished, but also more of an edge to it. So it does follow that Weezer kind of thing that you're talking about. Like, you know, that first album is very classical pop kind of stuff, and then it gets weirder with their second release.
Weirder, but still raw. Still very catchy. I think this is actually a good point to bring up right now, because following Sakura no Uta is when they release a couple more singles, Dote So Young and Wakamonotachi. And these are 6-7 minute long punk songs, which is kind of insane. And they manage to maintain a high energy level. They don't wear out their welcome, even across 6-7 minutes. So how do you go from writing a 1 minute long song like the Going Steady song we mentioned to pulling off a 6 minute long song? That's unheard of.
Yeah.
I don't want to listen to anyone play for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Except for Going Steady and Ging Nang Boyz.
I feel like even early on too, there's this like impulse to sort of like juice a melody, to like return to a melody, and Minna's a really strong melody writer, I think, in general, and the melodies really come out, but he'll repeat them a lot in the song. Even in Boys and Girls, some of the songs are getting to 4 minutes, and they're just, you know, 3 to 4 chord pop punk songs. But every time it feels like things are slightly different. There's enough variation that it feels pretty fresh a lot of the time. And in a song like Wakamonotachi or Dote So Young, I feel like the melodies are so powerful and the rawness so raw that it feels less like you're repeating parts and more just like you're being shot through this space kind of for 6 minutes.
Yeah, you definitely get carried on a journey.
That was one of the things that I think really appealed to me, because in the beginning I didn't understand, obviously, any of the lyrics. I didn't speak Japanese when I first heard them. And there's something that they're communicating even in just the sound. Like, not only the screaming and stuff, like, but just the actual, the rise and fall in the melody and stuff that creates a certain feeling of, I don't know, like it's an emotional buildup that I think, like, once I did understand the lyrics, I thought, oh, of course this is what they're saying. Like, that's kind of what I felt anyway without even understanding the lyrics. So that melody idea that you're talking about with, you know, Minna crafting these melodies, I think he knows how to create an emotional arc in the melody itself. But
yeah, the emotional presence of those songs is really undeniable. I would say it's really forward, and yeah, the kind of like raw screaming really started to show up in that second record, Sakura no Uta. Even I think in the first song, The Fool's March, it's he kind of busts out one of these like death metal screams that would have had no place on Boys and Girls or their presence earlier. It feels like already kind of that first song is a pretty like solid jump forward for the band.
I agree. And I was just listening to that album in preparation for this, and I forgot that I think that album, especially those first 2 or 3 songs, is what I think made me such a lifelong fan. Like those, especially once I did understand the lyrics, and it's something that Bob and I used to describe as desperate optimism. It's like he's screaming almost to convince himself, like, guys, we're gonna make it. This, you know, we're here for a reason. Like this is our time. This is our moment. We have to, you know, seize this opportunity and stuff. And it's in those lyrics, and it's in the vocal. Like, there's a desperation in the way he's yelling. It's not an anger. And then also in the melody itself, I think there's, you know, definitely that emotional feeling. And so, that second album is probably where I really started to connect, I think, with the band.
So definitely those later singles, the second album leading into the later singles, you know, they graduated out of being kind of a run-of-the-mill pop punk band, albeit a pretty good one. They graduated out of that. I think they graduated out of their insular punk scene, and they kind of emerged into the greater Japanese rock scene. You know, they were playing Fuji Rock Festival, and they supported Green Day on Green Day's 2002 Japanese tour. They were kind of, you know, knighted as the next big thing in Japanese punk. And then they broke up in 2003 abruptly. I actually just rewatched the DVD where they show them talking before the show about their breaking up. You know, the guitarist Asai walks out and just like, all right, well, fuck y'all, I'm out. Mirai's crying on the drums as they play Seishun Jidai for the first time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you know, I'm a kid on the internet in 2003. Like, this band broke up. I can't read any of this Japanese. What's going on? And as soon as I kind of found out that Ging Nang Boyz had become a thing, you know, I waited 2 long years for those Ging Nang Boyz albums to come out. And, you know, just kind of like with bated breath, wondering, you know, what's this new band all about?
Yeah. There was that weird single that Minna put out too, right? The Elephant Kashimashi tribute, and it's just him. It was called Ging Nang Boyz, but it was literally just him yelling without any instruments at all. And then at one point saying thank you to Abiko and people like that. And it's a really bizarre track. That was kind of the segue between the two bands, right?
Yeah, that was the first thing. And he released that within the first couple months of after Ging Nang Boyz had started. You know, that was his first official release as Ging Nang Boyz. And even then, I had drunk the Kool-Aid. I was so into it that I was like, dude, this guy is a genius. This guy is insane. I love it.
悲しみの果てに何があるかなんて俺は知らない見たこともないただあなたの顔が浮かんで消えるだろう
So, shortly after recording this song, Mineta asks Abiko and Mirai to join his new band again, and on guitar, they ask Chin Nakamura from the bands Snotty and Derangements. And, you know, if you guys have ever listened to Snotty, super fast, funky guitars, like if a hardcore band was playing funk, that's kind of the vibe in Snotty. I think, along with Mineta just kind of breaking out as a songwriter, as a performer, I think he had a good right-hand man with Chin as someone who could just kind of hold it down, but also be deranged at the same time.
Yeah, I think that Chin is kind of underappreciated in how much he directed the sound moving forward after that, because like that manic guitar is just, you can't replicate it. It's like such a crazy force, and how loose the songs got, but you still have this sense of control and stuff, because you know his musicianship is really excellent, but at the same time he's not afraid to go just like right to the edge where you feel like he's losing control. And I love that.
And it was during this time, you know, waiting with bated breath for them to finally release something, that I got to visit Japan for the first time, summer of 2004. At the time, I was volunteering at Asian Man Records, just little scenester kid helping out here and there. And Mike Park was like, "Oh, you're going to Japan? You're going to see this band, Ging Nang Boyz. My old friend Takahiro plays in this band." Takahiro being Chin's real name. So he set it up where I could go meet them when I went to go see them play. And here I am. You know, I'd studied Japanese in junior college for all of a year, spoke almost nothing, and got to meet them. I went to the show. They took me backstage. We saw some photos. I got to see them play a bunch of new songs I'd never heard. They did play a couple Going Steady songs too, but the thing you were talking about with Chin as a guitarist, they were so unhinged, so wild, and the songs were so tight. You know, I was just blown away just how, you know, Chin will be crawling through Abiko's legs, playing guitar on his back, and he doesn't skip a beat, doesn't miss a note. It was really, really something to see.
Yeah, it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, because he's probably the most mild-mannered out of all of them. He's just this really sweet, you know, now I don't know if I'm going to bury the lead here, but he's like a priest. So he's like the sweetest and most gentle guy, but then when you see him on stage, he's just this, like, he's in beast mode. And that's just so cool to see.
Yeah, just a total live wire. I felt like never really sure what was going to happen. You know, and it was kind of true for everybody in the band, but I think the only person who really matched the sort of total anything might actually happen energy of Mineta was Chin. Like, I feel like he was often covered in some sort of injury by the end of the set, you know, and very rarely made it through with more than about 3 strings left on his guitar, and just comes out looking like a complete mess, you know, by the end of it. And like, but it looks incredible, and the way the band still seems to be able to find the center of the songs while hitting so many far-flung parts that really don't touch the center at all is amazing to see. Honestly, that was really incredible. And yeah, I think Chin kind of hits both sides. Like, he can hold it down and can still just go completely off script, off into another world pretty much, and that energy is a huge part of their sound.
Yeah.
So, aside from me getting to see them live, we didn't know what to expect from their albums, and also didn't know that they'd be releasing 2 albums simultaneously. But shortly before they came out is when they released the video for School Kill. If the solo recording hadn't been enough sign, this video was for sure a sign that they were on a completely different trip now. I think it was like an 11-minute long video. It started out with some guy walking home through the dark, heavily breathing. And, you know, the music didn't even start until maybe 5 or 6 minutes into the video. And when the music started, it was being played on a stereo in the background of the action going on in the video, which involved Mineta freaking out in his bedroom, his ex-girlfriend smashing a bottle over his head. All the band members make cameos as, like, delivery people or as disembodied heads inside of toilets and freezers. So it was just, like, really kind of just, like, maybe not a fuck you to the fans, but I think it was just, like, this is what we're about now. You're either with it or, you know, jump off the bus now.
Yeah, I feel like it was kind of just like a clean start. Like, they just kind of want to, like, raise the ground and cleanse the palate. They're like, you know, this is a whole new thing, you know, and I almost feel like that video and then also the albums once they came out were almost like they were trying to shake loose the fans who weren't, who they'd gained, who didn't really care about, like, I don't know how to say it. I didn't really care about them musically so much as they were this image of this, like, polished, you know, pop punk band. I think that they were kind of like, all right, whoever stays on is, you know, the real deal kind of thing. Because
yeah, I think between that single that he released, the first Ging Nang Boyz song, and the video for School Kill, it was pretty clear that they weren't playing really by the rule book, you know, in any way anymore. Like, to do a video for your first song, your first video, have the first, like, 4 minutes of the video be completely unintelligible, like handycam in a dark street with no music and no people on screen, is pretty bold. It's a way to lose a lot of people, you know, right away. And yeah, that video, like, even when it starts playing the song, you can barely hear it because it's basically just on, like, a stereo in the room where Mineta is freaking out. It's a great video.
It gets turned up, it gets turned down, and it's just like, you're not even going to really get to hear the song, guys. You got to keep waiting.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like an anti-music video in a sense. And I feel like that's kind of, from this point on, I feel like that is something that the band does almost in cycles, where they're just kind of trying, it almost seems like they're antagonizing the audience in a way, because I remember those first 2 albums, I thought, oh, this is almost unlistenable. And then once I became kind of acclimated to them, I thought, oh, actually, this is pretty good. Then they would put something else out that was harsh in a totally new way. And they would make a video that was harsh in a totally new way. And they would do this continuously and continuously. And I think they probably did shed fans along the way. Up until the point where like it almost becomes just noise and not worth listening to at some points, right?
Oh, for sure. I think it's actually a really good time now to get into those first two albums. So on January 15th, 2005, 2 years to the day after Going Steady's breakup is when they released their first two albums, Door and Kimi to Boku no Daisanji Sekai Taisen Teki Renai Kakume, which I recently reread the article you wrote about them, Mike, and it is appropriate that Door with the busy album cover has the short title, and the other one with the really, really plain anime girl cover has the really obnoxiously long album title, which translated to something like yours and my Third World War-like love revolution. So they're really pushing it. Both albums start with really abrasive, just like minute-long hardcore songs. And eventually they work their way through sugary sweet pop songs. And both albums end with indulgent 10-minute long folk rock scream-alongs. You've pretty much been taken on a journey on both records. They're mastered so loud. They kind of shed the polish of Going Steady, where they're like, we're writing crazy songs, but they're radio friendly. At this point, they're just like, fuck convention. We're going to do some really wild shit.
Yeah.
And,
like barking like dogs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And having that be the opening of the record.
Yeah.
A kid could hear School Kill as the single and be like, the song's pretty poppy. And then they buy the record and it's just like, ah!
Yeah, it's difficult to convey just how, like, abrasive those records sound. Not even just the songs, but, like, the sound of it. It's so loud, it sounds always like it's on the verge of falling apart.
I played that for my son just the other day. We were driving in the car, so he's 13, and I thought he might be at the age where he can kind of appreciate like what this kind of stuff is. And I played him that Door, and it starts off with a kid's song that every little kid knows here in Japan, and he's like listening to it, and then it just devolves into this disgusting sounding mess. And I said, it sounds so crunchy and so like everything's forward right there in front, and it's very immediate sounding, but at the same time you can still hear pop elements and you can still hear the musicianship. And even he agreed, as a 13-year-old boy, he's saying like, yeah, I can hear that, but it's so abrasive, like it was hard for him to listen to.
I think they're in really good company, though, because the only other records I can think of that are that abrasive are Raw Power by the Stooges, just blown out to hell. The Exploding Hearts record was like that. But these are both bands that just have really, really great, catchy songs. But I think they wanted to find a way to kind of showcase that sort of raw punk energy on record. I think Guitar Wolf is another band that has records like that. And these are all bands that are just... They aren't content with just having a fast, loud song. I think they have to make the record as hard-hitting as possible to kind of get their message across. So
that point that you're making there, when you said it kind of sonically sounds like the Stooges, that was something that I remember even at the time thinking, like, in the Going Steady days, he started off as this clean-cut, Minna started off as this very clean-cut looking guy, and he wore like a tracksuit on stage, and it was very much of that 90s punk scene. And I think that he went for a very Iggy Pop kind of thing after that, where he's coming out with, bare-chested, like, and long hair, and he had blood on his face and stuff like that. And he's almost taken on a Iggy Pop sort of look, kind of like going away from that Green Day look that he was going for before.
Definitely. And I think this is kind of the Ging Nang Boyz, I think it was something like 8 songs on their 2 albums were re-recordings or reimagined versions of old Going Steady songs. But I think they made a very conscious decision, like we are something different. I think not even in a way where there was like drama or beef, but I think they made a conscious decision to distance themselves from typical punk bands, from the kind of like the friendly image of bands that wanted to be the new high standard. You know, I think he really did want to be the new Iggy Pop. You could see they started hanging out with more arty, more hip people in other scenes. You know, Minna starred in a movie that was based on a comic by some hip musician.
Yeah,
like this is they definitely went into a different direction. And so, you know, from their first shows at the beginning of 2003 to about 2005, 2006, when they're riding the wave of their 2 albums that have been released, they've kind of completely transitioned into a new world. And I definitely think they took a lot of people along for the ride, but for sure it wasn't the easy sing-along high school memories of Going Steady era.
Even people in our own crew, I remember like us passing those records around, and I remember specifically people from our group of friends, and we all grew up making kind of loud, messy music. In particular, I remember David saying, "I'm all for people being punk rock and pushing the envelope, but it has to be listenable at least." And he wouldn't go any further with the records because he considered it to be unlistenable, which is awesome.
Yeah, those records have a power to turn some people away for sure. And there's sort of like, it's kind of like a gambit almost. You kind of are like, go ahead and remove this X amount of audience for another set of audience which has such an intense connection to the music, a much more like direct and probably a feeling from the music that mirrors the sound of the music in a lot of ways. I think they were making messier music and probably trying to make it for messier people too, in a way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that I've thought that personally. Like, if I shared a Going Steady record with a friend and they liked it, I wouldn't necessarily know if we're still vibing in the same way. But if I played that album Door for somebody and they got it, I feel like it's a litmus test for a particular type of sensibility where they're like, yeah, this sounds really messy and really like intentionally destructive in like a very cool way. I think that I instantly know, oh, this person's vibing on the same wavelength as me.
Yeah. And it's a big difference, too, from just going back to Boys and Girls. You know, the second song on that, I think it's the second song, Universal. The chorus of the song, sing a Universal song. And that's kind of like the idea of that record. It feels very much like love and young spirit, young energy, and just kind of a
very anthemic.
Very anthemic, and really just taking like simple elements, taking pop punk, power pop, and like doo-wop kind of melodies, and then just doing something with that, trying to make a universal song. And then by the time they get to Ging Nang Boyz, it's a totally different thing. They're not trying to necessarily do anything universal. It feels much more like distinct experiences, like things that have happened to certain people rather than something that everybody has gone through. And in a way, it feels much more personal, much more that rawness that they always have. It feels very much like it has now been embodied in like every part of the band, basically every part of the music.
Yeah. So I at this point, I wanted to kind of get into our experiences with the band, to kind of give people an idea why we're doing this podcast, who we are. Shortly after these albums came out, I knew the band a little bit, and they hit me up in the summer of 2006. They said, hey, we want to come visit the U.S. We're going to fly into San Francisco. The only people we know are you and Mike Park. And they went to a wedding in Hawaii, and I remember Cheen called me when I was at your house, Adam, on the phone from Hawaii, and he's like, hey, what's up? We'll be there in 2 days. And I remember you and me, after the call was over, jumping on the bed just in sheer excitement, like, what's up? We're going to hang out with this band?
Yeah.
This is crazy.
Yeah, literally jumping on the bed.
Yeah, no shame, just jumping on the bed. I remember Ami looking at us like we were maniacs, and she was trying to play it cool, but she was trying to play it cool to us, being like clearly people who weren't playing it cool, which I thought was really funny. But that brings me to something else I think about too. When making this podcast, I feel kind of weird about making it as someone who like knows the band, has had some firsthand experiences, to call them a friend. Adam, you talk to them on the phone pretty often. Mm-hmm. But honestly, as such a huge fan, I feel like we have something to offer in terms of exploring the themes in their lyrics, their story arc, interspersed with some personal anecdotes and knowledge. I think, our experience with them coming to hang out with us in 2006, we took them to and helped them play an impromptu show at Gilman where 3 of the 6 bands scheduled had canceled. I think who else was there, Adam? Ami, Max. There really weren't that many people there. There was maybe 40 people at this show.
Right. Yeah, it was a very small kind of affair. But it was such a big deal to them who had modeled their whole lifestyle on that Lookout Records, Gilman, like early Berkeley punk type of thing. So
that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
The very next day, we're hanging out with them at your house, and Cooper asked them to play a show. I had been too shy to ask, and they're like, yeah, we'll do it. And then they play a show at our practice space the next day. Kind of a wild whirlwind week hanging out with them.
Oh, man. So I was just, you released their album in the United States, and I wrote the liner notes for that. And I went back and reread that. I remember at the time when I wrote those liner notes that once you actually published the record and I looked at it, I thought, oh, I'm writing only about myself. Like I keep writing about myself here and I should be writing about the band. But when I went back and reread them now, I think there's something compelling about what I wrote because I can't really separate myself, my own story from theirs. Like it was so influential. And I think that those moments, what you're talking about when they came and, they stayed at my house overnight and we had a party and they were up on my roof, kicking beer cans down in the neighbor's yard and stuff. And that whole experience, there's things that I'd forgotten about, like when we were stuck on the Bay Bridge in traffic and we were running back and forth between cars, changing clothes with each other. And then our friend Max was running from one car to the next, trying to pull on somebody else's clothes, and I got a bra on his head and somebody else's jeans, and he tripped because he was running. I think his
pants were around his ankle or something.
Yeah, he had his pants around his ankles, and he was trying to pull them up, and he tripped and rolled under the wheels of a truck and almost got hit. And when you're saying that, that was so wild. That week was so wild because I was working every day. Still, I was working a 9-to-5 job, like a suit and tie job. And I would come out at night and stay out with these guys all night. And it was just absolute insanity, the kind of stuff we were doing.
Well, I was going to say, to me, the 2000s decade feels very much like our crew. It was like the decade of Going Steady and the Ging Nang Boyz. It was the decade where Japanese punk and Japanese rock music was pretty much the thing that united all of us. We were all really interested in it. We were all consuming pretty much the same bands in pretty much as passionate a way as each other. And while that was happening, the rest of the U.S., it seemed like, was getting into like Interpol and a lot of like the 2000s emo kind of revival. And like there's this whole scene in the US kind of rock world that I feel like we just existed almost parallel to. Like Shinobu at the time, our band, Bob and I, we had covered Going Steady once and we kind of got just dropped into that world from there. And I feel like our reference points for music at that time were almost all from Japan. When
our reference points were literally foreign to all of our peers in San Jose. We were on a different wavelength than everyone else. We kind of existed in our own world thanks to what we were listening to.
But as an outsider, I wasn't in the band with you guys, but as an outsider, for sure, like I heard Chin's influence coming out of your guitar when you played, like when you played the really fast, he
does like a high octave, like a manic high octave.
Yeah, and it's like between a lick and a chord, it's like a kind of moving up and down the fretboard and stuff like that. So I heard a lot of these like Japanese bands that we were all listening to coming out in your sound.
Yeah, in like hanging with them here, it seemed like to us this was kind of like the height of things. Like to us, they were like the biggest band in the world at the time. But they play Gilman and nobody knows who they are. They play our practice space and like it's mostly our friends who've either heard us heard about them through us, or we're just trying to get them to be like, you have to come to this because you have to see this, basically. But yeah, even that show, I think there was maybe 45 people there, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that room could only comfortably fit 25 people at the most. It could only uncomfortably fit 25 people at the most. So just to, keep it a little brief, we got to hang out with the band in summer of 2006. Adam, I think you moved to Japan shortly after this, maybe about a year later?
Yeah. Yeah, I moved here in 2007, January of 2007, yeah.
Wow, so that was probably 6 months after we hung out with them that summer.
That's wild. That is a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
Kind of a really landmark moment for all of our youths, our early mid-20s youths. So riding this high of being able to meet and hang out with our punk idols, we were all so excited to hear their next release, which ended up being what I think is their peak, I Don't Want to Die. This was followed up by a few more singles and side projects, but from about 2008 to 2014, the band stopped playing as many shows and was out of the public eye largely until the release of, yet again, 2 new albums in 2014, 9 years to the day after their last 2, entitled Beach and Hikari no Naka ni Tatete ne.
It's that Pokemon marketing strategy. Release 2 at once all the time.
These 2 albums, sadly, were also accompanied by the announcement that Abiko, Mirai, and Chin had all quit the band, and this kind of marks the end of their story to me. And, we got into some of it today, but we'll start to explore more of their lyrical themes, from puppy love to deep sexual neuroses. We'll talk about the evolution of the music from straightforward pop punk to the incorporation of hardcore, folk rock, even some wild Eurobeat shit later on. And we'll get into how they've influenced musicians who followed in their wake. And, we talked about High Standard a little before. Great band. And they got some love stateside in the 90s alongside Japanese groups like Pizzicato 5 and Shonen Knife. But I feel like the Western establishment stopped paying attention to a lot of Japanese music in the 2000s. And out of a lot of overlooked bands, Ging Nang Boyz are particularly deserving of attention. So buckle up, people. I hope you enjoyed this first episode enough to kind of, get a feel for what we're going to talk about. Hopefully some of you already know what the band is about. If you're listening to this and you don't know what the band is about,
I almost envy you. I almost envy you because it's such an experience. It really is. It's something that I can't think of another band that does what they do in that way. Like it's a journey for sure.
Well, cool. This is the first episode of Dog People. Thanks for tuning in, Mike, Adam. It's been a pleasure.
Hell yeah.
Looking forward to the next one.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Dog People. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at DogPeople666, where we'll be posting supplemental photos and such for each episode. If you like what we're doing here, help us spread the word by sharing the show with a friend or two. Also, check out Adam's other podcast, Searching for Grog, wherein 3 brothers try to reconstruct their childhood memories of a road trip involving sledding accidents, freak hailstorms, confessions of love, and an arcade game about cavemen playing golf. Shout out to some of our other favorite music podcasts out there: Better Yet, a long-form interview podcast covering the best artists from the extended DIY punk community. Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, and As You Were, a podcast about Alkaline Trio, both of which inspired us to do something similar. And the In Defense of Ska podcast by our old friend Aaron Carnes.